Hello and welcome to APAC Games Weekly episode 46. As always, I am your host, Connell Suter, and on APAC Games Weekly, we give you a roundup of the biggest news of the past week from across the APAC games industries. On today's episode, we'll be covering Nintendo's incredible 2023 and their continued dominance in the Japanese market. We'll then cover Capcom's aims of expanding further in Southeast Asia, a major APAC company restructuring, and finally finishing on a story about female gamers now outnumbering male gamers in Southeast Asia. So, plenty of topics to cover today. Let's dive straight in to Nintendo's incredible 2023 performance. Nintendo shares hit record highs, driven by Switch 2 possibilities and oil money speculation. So, kicking off our Nintendo news, Nintendo's shares have hit record highs since the start of this year, valued now at 7,902 yen, which is around 54 USD per share. That means that Nintendo's market capital has now surpassed 10 trillion yen, which is around 69 billion USD, which they've only hit once before in 2007 following the insane success of the Wii. Japan stocks are actually generally doing well, with the Nikkei stock average up 2.01% as of Wednesday to close at its highest level since February 1990, an insane 34 years ago. Nikkei reports that Nintendo's incredible value high has been driven by the anticipated launch of a new console, high expectations from investors on Nintendo's original IPs, especially following the Mario movie, and supposedly some speculation about oil money funds looking to acquire Japanese gaming stocks. An interesting note there is that supposedly dev kits for this mysterious new console were in the hands of key studios last summer, suggesting we may hear something at least about a new console sometime this year. Whether that's realistic is hard to say, but it's certainly fascinating to think about. Nintendo has now dominated Japan's game sales for 19 consecutive years. So, final sales totals for 2023 in Japan show, as you'd expect, that Nintendo has once again absolutely dominated the market, this being the 19th consecutive year for them to do so. The last time that they didn't win the market, if you want to position it that way, was in 2004. In that year, 8 of the top 10 selling titles were for the PS2. Memories, eh? Similarly, there's only one year that Nintendo didn't top console sales, which was the one year that the PSP was the leading platform. It's really interesting to think about the PSP now. It was such a fascinating console and a really interesting time in the games industry when all these companies really wanted to get into handhelds. There were failed ones like the Gizmodo. Bring back some hilarious memories if you've never heard the story of what happened with that one. But the PSP was super popular, did really well in Europe and Japan, and I don't think did badly in America either, but they never did do the full-on PSP2 that everybody wanted. Especially interesting to think about now, with Sony branching off into these other areas like the PSVR 2, even though the PSP probably was more successful at the time than the PSVR 1 was when it came out. Very interesting. As part of these reports, we also now have final sales figures for Switch consoles in Japan in 2023. They managed to move over 4 million consoles, bringing the Switch lifetime sales there to 32 million. To compare this with other platforms for a bit of context, the PS5 in Japan sold 2.6 million units, which is a 124% increase on 2022, and Microsoft sold 141,712 Xbox Series X/S's. That's down 47% from their 2022 totals. If you ever needed a perfect example of why Microsoft cares so much about getting into Japan, think about the fact that they didn't even sell 10% of the consoles that Sony did. And that's only the PS5. We'll touch a little bit more on that at the end of this story. This is really why Microsoft has been making such a concerted effort with Japanese developers, as the numbers just aren't comparable. We reported on that even last week, and then just before the new year, with Microsoft making moves in Japan and having representatives who used to work for Sony going around saying you can't just rely on Sony for your games. Very interesting. And speaking of interesting, a final note on this is that the PS4 sold just under 74,000 units, which is a 221% year-on-year increase. I cannot for the life of me think why so many PS4s were sold in Japan, especially with that year-on-year increase even dwarfing the PS5. Super interesting. And then to compare the number of PS4 to the Xbox Series S, sure, the Xbox Series S may have sold about double what the PS4 sold, but the PS4 isn't even being supported fully anymore. I don't know what games are even coming out on it necessarily. Really fascinating stuff, and again, one of the things that just makes the Japanese market such a fascinating one to look at. Capcom aims to expand its brand further in Southeast Asia. Capcom appears to be on a bit of a mission at the moment to expand and really solidify its presence in Southeast Asia. You might remember that last year they established a subsidiary in Singapore, and they had a very notable expansive presence at Gamescom Asia. The website Game Braves had the chance to speak to Bian Lee, who's the managing director of Capcom Singapore. On the topic of their expansion, he said, quote, Capcom has been on building a team and establishing a stronger foundation for its operations. Establishing a presence in Singapore helps us to better understand and cater to the Southeast Asian gaming market. Through localized marketing strategies, partnerships, and collaboration tailored to this region, we aim to build a stronger connection with the gaming community in Southeast Asia. The Singaporean office functions as a central hub for supporting Southeast Asia in providing swift information dissemination within the industry. Gamers can expect to see more of our events and participation in regional gaming conventions such as Gamescom Asia. We are also engaging more with Southeast Asian gamers through social media and other platforms. End quote. Quite a long one, that. And the words Southeast Asia were said so many times that I felt like I was going crazy. But of course, Capcom, esports, and Southeast Asia really do go hand in hand, with Street Fighter, among many of their other titles, being majorly important games in the world of esports. As part of the interview with Bian Lee, he also confirmed that they will be planning more esports events in Southeast Asian countries. Capcom, of course, isn't the only Japanese company expanding in Southeast Asia, with lots of Japanese titles getting new SEA-focused localization over the past couple of years. In a final comment from Bian Lee, he said, quote, the gaming market in Southeast Asia holds substantial growth opportunities, particularly driven by the enthusiasm of young people, a high growth rate of revenue to gamer ratio, and the vast future potential of the region. With some countries as emerging markets, this presents untapped opportunities as well. The youthful demographic not only fuels the current growth, but also indicates a sustainable demand for gaming content in the future. End quote. I mean, I think he's completely right. Obviously, he'll know far more than I do, but from everything we've talked about on APAC Games Weekly over the past year, it really is clear that Southeast Asia is a huge area for growth in the games industry, and one that I still think not enough Western developers are paying attention to. Microsoft certainly are. We talked about that last year. They've been approaching companies across Southeast Asia, which we saw with the establishment of their Southeast Asian liaison, which was a completely new department and position, as well as bringing lots of Indonesian games onto Game Pass and things like that. Of course, anyone listening to this who's listened to us won't need to hear that Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore are all really lucrative industries and markets. So hopefully we'll see a bit more of west to east, as opposed to just seeing Japanese companies leaving their home market to expand further. All good news though, and good luck to Capcom with everything they've got planned. ByteDance may sell some of its games as part of a previously announced restructuring. So it's being reported that ByteDance, who are the owners of TikTok, are currently looking for options to sell many of their assets and IPs from their games business, supposedly with Tencent as a primary potential buyer. This news was initially reported by Late Post in China, who said that ByteDance is in talks with Tencent regarding Nuverse, which is specifically their games publishing wing. When asked for a comment, a representative of ByteDance told the South China Morning Post that an agreement had not yet been reached. You might remember that they did announce this restructure in, I believe, November of 2023, which we did report on, but with their 2,000 plus employees, it's really hard to say how expansive those cost reductions were, how many of these people are still there in their positions. It's really hard to say. Overall, this may simply be a consolidation to focus on their already successful areas, but we will have to see exactly how this story pans out and where all these assets and IPs end up going. There are now more female gamers than male gamers in Southeast Asia. So, in our final story, new reports from Nico Partners are suggesting that the number of female gamers is now outpacing male gamers in Southeast Asia, with 53% of gamers being female overall in the region. Typically, in Asia, that number averages out to be around 37%, so you can see why Southeast Asia is being highlighted with these impressive figures. Within that figure, the highest individual country is the Philippines, with 63% of gamers being female, which is seriously impressive. Reportedly, because of this huge demographic change, they are seeing more women pursuing games careers across really all areas of development. But among the good news is an interesting question. Why are women still underrepresented in Southeast Asian esports, and really esports generally? Nico Partners, when asked about this, did suggest a number of reasons, with one primary issue being that women's tournaments are often given much smaller prize pools than male tournaments. I'll be honest, I didn't even realize that they did gender segregated esports, as there is some where they are certainly mixed gender. I'm not sure why you would need to be split gender, as it's not a physical competition, but whatever reason, who knows. The difference in prize money between these tournaments can be highlighted with some figures. One that I saw being discussed on this topic was Valorant tournaments as a great example, unfortunately, with VCT 2023 Game Changers Championship, which within the context of what's been discussed, I think is a female-only competition, had a total prize pool of 500,000 USD. That's only 22% of the 2.25 million USD pool, which was for the Valorant Championships 2023. Now, I am not super into Valorant esports, I'll let you know. So without knowing more specifics about those tournaments, it does sound like the latter one is kind of their main Valorant tournament, but that really still doesn't excuse the huge disparity in winnings. We're not talking about a little boost for their main one, we're talking about it's literally more than 4 times the amount of money that this other tournament had. Very, very strange. Lisa Cosmas Hansen, who is president and CEO of Nico Partners, told One Esports, quote, "Furthermore, the current data shows that women are significantly less likely to be engaged or interested in esports. The esports market is still largely male dominated, and there's little there to drive interest among female gamers." End quote. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of news in a way, but certainly heading in the right direction. We can really just hope for more equity and equality among everybody in esports in the years to come, and how that will drive more female gamers into esports themselves. It isn't surprising that when you have no representation, people don't feel that they have a way to get in. So we really hope that that changes. It's certainly great news overall, the idea that some of these countries have such a predominant female gaming population, and it really does show how far we've come from the days where I remember of the mid-2000s where gamers were just guys, and that's what everybody assumed, including everybody selling games. So really good news though overall, and let's hope that kind of esports can catch up a little bit at least. And that was it for APAC Games Weekly episode 46. As always, thank you so much for checking out this show, and if you have just found us on YouTube for the past couple of episodes, do check out the Spotify link in the description if you want to listen to our 2023 episodes and hear some of the stories that have even been mentioned today that are all coming around to fruition. I hope that you found these stories interesting and that they've informed you just that little bit more about the games industries of APAC and what's going on with them. I hope you can join us next week for episode 47, coming out the same time as always, Monday at 12 PM GMT. But until then, have a great week.